Well, that was pretty interesting. You had 4 different perspectives on where we're going to go. I will say here that one of the things that you heard in common through all 4 of these guys here, and actually throughout the day, when you're talking about ag technology, essentially you're talking about sensors and data transmission. So that's covering all the stuff, new ag technology up here. None of that works without broadband in the farm field. That's your constraint. Now, I have actually heard a lot of anecdotal complaints about the lack of broadband in certain fields. Some have it, some don't. And the ones that don't have it is the constraint of adopting a lot of that technology. And so I think it is something we have to remember that with all this ag technology, I mean, think about it in the 1930s with electricity. Electricity had come to all the big cities. It was not in the rural areas. So if you didn't have electricity, you weren't going to get the modern dairy with the electrically operated milking machines. The big dairies would have been possible without that. You'd still, I mean, you're going to have like 100 people hand milking 100 cows, or if you have 1,000 cows, 1,000 people wouldn't have happened. So the necessary sort of predecessor to getting to the technology of its day, it's electric driven, was actually have electricity. And some rural areas actually even today don't have electricity. So you're not going to even get to the broadband without the electricity, but you got to have the broadband to get to that. And if you look around the valley, just go down the road, where you go down even just I-5 is the poster child for it when your cell phone conversation drops. I think Clinton and I had one of these conversations. We're talking to each other, going down the road, conks out. Perfect example. Your machine going down is you're not going to have your machine going from one field to the next and it conks out. Then what happens? So we need to remember that because there are many areas we have to work together on. This is an area in terms of rural broadband that often we don't think about it. I've talked about to actually Kaiser Permanente about their plans for delivering healthcare in rural areas. And a lot of the things they talk about is actually which is actually on here, telemedicine, telehealth, and remote delivery of healthcare. And then I asked them, well, none of that works without broadband. And they, are you assuming it's there? And their answer was yes. So my response was, don't assume it's there. You also have a stake in getting rural broadband in place. We're all better off with that. It's something I think it's very important to remember. Well, now we're in the question and answer section. So for the audience, do we have a question right here?
I'm glad you brought that last subject up. And so the question is, so we know the problem of access to broadband. Where do we go to solve it?
Well, actually, there is a project that's going on right now to validate that the lack of broadband in farm fields. It actually was funded by CETF, the California Emerging Technologies Fund. It's a very small project. It would actually survey some farms in both Fresno and Yolo County to determine the presence of broadband in the field, and then ask the farmers questions how that affects their farm profitability with the equipment.
Well, let's take it a couple steps further. In education, it's an issue for us as well, because the students may have access in the schools, either through Kings County or Fresno County, but they don't have access in their homes, okay, to have access to this technology. So you compound that. And then in terms of the medical aspect, which is I think a great solution to some of these issues, you still don't have the telemedicine aspects of this in the homes to be able to provide this. So, and then you have AT&T or Comcast deciding, this isn't profitable, I'm not going to be able to be here. We just pull out, okay? And so I guess my question is, it's just one of these questions you ask when you're in the shower. Why doesn't the state solve this problem? in terms of viewing this as a utility rather than as, gee, this is an ag issue,
Right.
not it's a rural communities issue that has certainly federal implications, but also
Right.
state implications. And so that's why I asked the question, where do we go to solve it? Many agencies might have a
Sure.
hand in this.
That very question is being dealt with right now, both at the federal and at the state perspective. I talked about CETF, and they actually are, in terms of for state government, they're the ones who have been getting funds, specifically public funds from the state, to build broadband as grants. Because the point to remember is the reason why the large telecoms are not interested in the rural areas, because it doesn't fit their model for profits. They just don't see it as an area that generates profits. They're focused, their basic model is urban and population density. So using either one of those, that's why they're not there. But we can make the argument that for all of these reasons listed here, the rural areas benefit from that. Our challenge is that all of these areas here, which we know the rural areas and the rural economy clearly benefits and will drive, if this as the platform, if it's there, just like electricity did in the 1930s and 40s. But the challenge is we don't have an easy way to monetize that for the benefit of the provider, the telecom in this case as the example. So in lieu of that, that's the argument for a public investment of resources to create that. So there are a set of resources at USDA, actually throughout the federal government, some of them at USDA explicitly for broadband. Some of them sit over actually at the FCC through the Commerce Department. There's a set of resources. The state of California, it turns out, has many different resources. There's CETF directly. I think they had about $200 million before. They're asking for about $300 million as they get renewed for funding. The state public library system actually had $178 million appropriated for it for libraries to be hooked up with Wi-Fi. There are a lot of libraries in rural areas. The education system, with the required testing, computer testing in schools, well, if you're going to do computer testing in schools, you've got to have broadband connection to the schools wherever they are for that to work, and it has to have the breadth to be able to carry if everyone is taking the test at the same time. So there are different resources, and again, it's like one of the themes that actually has come out in the discussion here is you look at agriculture or you look at broadband or the rural areas, there are resources out there, but they sit in different silos. Part of our challenge is actually to bring all of these pieces together, all the resources that are behind that, and stitch it together to make it work. And I think it is there. And then once you've done that, then I don't think the total amount necessary is as great as you might think as part of that. Yes?
Terry, how long would it take IBM's Merlin to figure out how to program robots to replace farmers? Watson. How long would it take Watson? Merlin, Watson, Wilson, Wilbur, one of those wizards.
Hopefully we won't need Watson. Hopefully we'll have the brain trust or technicians to be able to do that.
Over here.
I actually attended an event last spring at Hartnell College, and it was really neat because it was like a Shark Tank atmosphere, and they brought in all these people from Silicon Valley that were pitching different ideas to panelists and farmers in the room. And it was very educational and very eye-opening of what is out there and what's being developed. So there are things happening in ag in a big way. So, and also, I'm involved with American Agri-Women, so every year we go to DC, we always talk about broadband access.
Over here.
In thinking about adopting all this technology and hardware on the field side, we're seeing a big leap in field techs, going from guys riding around on quads with shovels, being able to turn a valve and dig up that valve and replace it, to now needing techs that know how to use a portable O-scope and troubleshoot a digital system. So how do you see that being implemented in the real world and being accepted by the farming community.
Anyone here?
I think, so one of the previous panels had the labor costs and overtime issue. I forget who that was. But if you look at, the laborer, the guy that's going to go out and turn a valve on and off, I think that goes away over time, right? I can turn a valve off and off in my software today, remotely, right? I don't need somebody to do that. So the caliber of individual that's going to be on the field is going to have to deal with data and information systems as their core, kind of as what their core doing, or collecting data out of a UAV or things like that. If you look at the Midwest, laborers aren't, you came, right? You came from that. You don't have laborers, they run the farm. One guy runs the farm on a combine, for hundreds of acres, right? We'll start seeing that more and more in California because labor, because of costs, things like that, efficiency. And I think the individual that's going to be on the farm has got to have the skills, to do that, right? It's just going to be part of the business. It's not going to be, I can drive a quad and I can turn a valve on and on, because that's a zero. I mean, that's in the next 10 years, that's not needed, right? So I don't know if that doesn't answer your question, but that just reinforces that they have to get there, whatever that is.
And I guess that's half of it. The other half is, okay, well, how do you get the farmer to see, I don't need 20 of these guys on quads. I now need the 1 or 2 guys.
It's going to come down to an economic decision, is basically, and that's where I think it happened in the Midwest. 2 basic reasons why precision ag developed in certain areas. One was because there was some type of innovator, some type of champion. It could have been, some areas it was the school. In some areas it was a grower that forced the co-op consultant to force the issue. And to say that, hey, I want this technology applied here. I need it applied. I can see the economic return to it. So you better start training people to be able to do this for me. And other times, I worked at Hawkeye Community College when we developed a precision ag program there. We started putting out graduates that knew the technology, and where they landed, small pockets of precision farming developed. So I see in developing the workforce, you start putting out educated people that know how to use the technology, and that gives the grower a choice. Some growers may choose, okay, I don't feel like I really need this. I don't see the economic benefit. Fine. But the growers that do want to initiate it, we need to have people available there. And that's when it grows.
I think this is also a very good example of where regulation is going to drive things, because you heard the discussion about the minimum wage or the overtime rules. So if the cost per farm worker is going to go up, that pressure to become more efficient, for more productivity per farm worker, is going to be there. So that then opens the door. It's going to be the push to, the shift from the 20 on the little trucks to the 1 when it becomes automated. That is a driver of that type of innovation.
Hi.
Yes.
First of all, I wanted to compliment the organizers of the event for today and tomorrow's sessions. It's been very fascinating to sit here and learn a lot from all of you. I think the technology panel, you all did a good job, and I think the technology is fascinating and needed, very much so. My question is from the laborer standpoint. Once the laborers, and we have a shortage of labor, like many of you have stated, but for those that are in those positions, once they become obsolete and displaced, are there any concerted efforts by some of your case studies where there are incumbent training programs or upgrade programs for them to become the technicians that you're looking for? what becomes of those individuals and those wage earners?
All right, yeah, any new technology, you know, the big concern is displaced workers. You know, you got some new technology that's going to replace, autonomous tractors. Well, now we don't need tractor drivers. Well, actually what we need, though, is technicians to manage the technology, to support the technology. So there's always other jobs for those displaced workers, but they need more education. So the training that we're developing at West Hills, we already have, in fact, a advanced precision farming course that we're offering this semester, and I think it's filled. In fact, we got a waiting list of people to get into that course, and I think almost every one of those people are workers in the field. They're incumbent workers that are coming, that are going to that class for that advanced training.
I would argue that the need can be met precisely by the Farm of the Future and West Hills. The challenge is to connect to those farm workers, the existing farm workers who see this change, because we actually have talked about this. The existing farm workers who see the change, they see it the incremental change, they see it in their daily lives as to what's happening on the farm. They know that. The challenge is to get the training to be that ag technology farm worker of the future now. So they're the ones. And because of this shift in the decline in the number of farm workers and the fact that there are not competing farm workers really coming into California anymore, then these existing farm workers are in a very good position to acquire these technology skills. It also has the equity benefit of those who have technology skills. Doesn't matter what field you're in, but the wages go up. So they will be, you know, in terms of they'll have higher income from that standpoint.
I'd just like to add to that the knowledge is not lost on those workers who might be displaced by technology. And our challenge in education is to take that knowledge and assess it and to apply it into other areas for that individual. Because what we've done in the past, our history has been, well, you know, we've got a welding machine and now an automatic welding machine, so, you know, you go out and find something else. Well, we can still take that knowledge that that worker has about what's involved in making a good weld and build upon that and give them credit for that, you know, into that knowledge and that learning, and apply that to another field, if it might be, or that technical aspect of things. So that knowledge is never lost on that worker, but it's up to us to acknowledge that information that they have and apply it to those areas.
I would say that, you know, we've had a lot of discussion about precision agriculture, and I kind of like to wrap this up in terms of looking into the future. And I would say that it's not precision agriculture that we should be thinking about. It's prescription agriculture. And I'll tell you why. Because you had this discussion about the soil quality and looking at things from that perspective as opposed to just a whole chunk of a field, or this is just a 10-acre block and you treat it all the same. With all these sensors, where we're going is you're going to have the data and be able to do the data analytics, which is the new major of the future, if you can create it here. You can farm and take each square foot and maximize what needs to be done throughout the season of all the inputs and treating that and looking at all the weather variables, or probably do it per tree. You could do it as well for orchards. That's prescription agriculture, because the analogy is this. When you go to the doctor and you've got your set of ailments, and the doctor doesn't just give you some generic, you know, everybody should get this. No, they actually are trying to write a prescription specific to your set of medical conditions. We can do that with plants. That's the future. And that's how we're going to feed the world in the future, is it's going to that approach, that to maximize the amount of production that we can get out of the square footage of land, each square foot of land that we have. I guess I'll just conclude and leave you with those thoughts. So thank you to the panel.
We're going to move right along so we can finish this up and stretch our legs and get on the bus and go have a libation or two and things like that. Before we get into our immediate action plan on what our interactive conversation will be, I'd like to extend my thanks to the moderators and panelists from the last group. How about giving them a round of applause? All of our partners at West Hills Community Colleges, let's give them another round of applause. And one guy who's just too humble to recognize himself, but how about applause for Stu Van Horn? Stu's been this was his idea and concept that we've been moving forward, and it's been great for our valley and also for our institution. So before we move to the hosted reception, this session is interactive, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jack Agualco and Bob Gore. Bob is running point for us. He just stepped out for a minute. He'll be right back, prescribing some notes for us to react to. But we'd like to begin with our perspectives. Jack, how about you first?
Thank you, Frank. It's a delight to be back here, and I thought today has been fabulous. So some thoughts that I put together listening to everybody, and I thought all our panelists and moderators did a fabulous job, so I second your motion, Frank. But one thing I learned for sure is I do not want to be messing with Glenda when she's moderating a panel. I mean, there's the soup Nazi, and then there's the moderator Nazi. So Glenda gets that award. So some things that struck me. First of all, I think there's no question that partnerships and collaboration have to be at the base of this, and that reaches across all the academic lines and reaches into contact with the grower community as well as the environmental community, because those discussions need to happen. And I think this has been so successful. I think that Stu and Frank ought to think about taking the show on the road to LA, San Diego, and the Bay Area to talk about partnerships that West Hills can really forge and sponsor to get this word out, because let's be honest, today we're in many respects talking to ourselves, and there are different folks that we need to be reaching out to. And on that score, I think we need to have direct communication with the commodity groups, because that's generally how you're going to reach the farm community. The county farm bureaus, to be sure, but growers generally are going to get organized around their commodities. So having West Hills reach out and your partners reach out to the commodity groups, I think would be a significant return on that investment. One thing that struck me listening to Adrian when he was up here talking is, here's a guy, football player from Florida, has come out here and is eager to get engaged in the ag sector in California. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now without a mentor and without internship opportunities. So I've already talked to Clint about saying we need to make sure that Adrian and newbies to the ag sector who don't have the familial background and the multi-generational exposure have that kind of support system. So if you're eager to help Adrian, please sign up with Clint and he will hook you up for sure. I think we need to all make sure that the growers and the managers are involved in identifying needs for ag tech, so that we're not just having Silicon Valley, big thinkers develop approaches that won't really have any on-the-ground applicability. So that interaction, I think, is absolutely important. On Glenda's point about UC Extension, the funding issue has been out there for quite a while. The decline started after Prop 13, and it needs to get restored. And to that end, I think that the mission of UC Extension ought to be broadened to really work on helping growers and the regulated community comply with the regulatory matrix, so that people, particularly the small growers who don't have the ability to hire lawyers, consultants, and engineers, get the help that the land grant institution is supposed to be providing. There's no question, based on the last panel, that the communications data transfer infrastructure has got to be beefed up in rural California. And Sunny McPeak and her team that the PUC helps fund through charges on our utilities, they continue to try to do what they can do, but there are monetary restrictions on their efforts, and so I think that's got to be made definitely a state priority. From a socioeconomic standpoint, a couple thoughts. One is, what are we going to do with the displaced workers? Not all are going to immediately be in the position, if they're in their 50s, for example, that they're going to be able to immediately make the change and be adopters of new technologies and approaches. So I think working with the churches and the nonprofit institutions where they may be more inclined to go would be, for example, that's much of the way the immigration system is being worked out is the churches and the nonprofits are the primary point of contact. So that ought to be something that the college can work with churches and nonprofits to make sure that those training opportunities are available for those who may not have the wherewithal to get over to Coalinga or Lemoore. So that would be something I would recommend. And then I think finally, Bill Boudreau said it, I think, well this morning, where he really said that we need precision regulation to deal with the new requirements for precision farming, that it's got to be algebraic. They need to really link up. So I encourage the regulators present and those in the farming sector to really kind of focus on having one really equate with the other. But overall, I think just a fabulous day, Frank.
Thank you. I would concur, and I guess one of the things I'm always struck about is the self-criticism that agencies give themselves about the fact that, you know, I'm doing this work but I'm siloed because I'm working here and I'm doing this other. You know, we're just as guilty of that in education. You know, we have the university system, we have the CSU system, we have the community college system, and we have the K-12 system, and we sometimes have a hard time working together. It seems like, yeah, and the privates, yeah. And sometimes the drought or the downturn in the economy, you know, so two of my favorite Americans, Benjamin Franklin and Malcolm X. You know, Benjamin Franklin said, necessity is the mother of invention, and Malcolm X said, necessity is a mother. And you know, that's you know, it kind of forces you to begin to look at what you've got to do. And really this pipeline that we need to develop from the high school, from the grade school, through the community college and the university is really ripe in agriculture. We're having some wonderful results with the wonderful company in places like Avenel High School, where we've developed a curriculum for kids who come out of they finish their eighth grade in their freshman year they start as a summer camp with us for a week or a week and a half, and to be introduced to agriculture. They don't particularly want to do that because their aunts and their uncles and their mom and their dad was involved in agriculture and picking. But after a week in our program and getting to turn on a drill or to run a welder or to drive a tractor or to, you know, to lay out a lettuce field on a CAD/CAM computer and realize that they were just told they used algebra to figure that out. You know, they walk in that freshman year through those doors in high school and they belong there. You know, they know something as they get there. So that pipeline is there, and I think we need to kind of think a little differently about how we onboard these kids from high school to whether it's a community college or whether it's to the CSU or the university. We need to really work together to make that a seamless transition. Pest Control Advisor program, it's an interesting program for us. It's one that we started a number of years ago because of an ask by large farmers here about, hey, we need more pest control advisors. When we first started it, one of the first calls I got was from a gentleman that Jack referred me to from the LA area. LA Community College District wants to get involved in our program to do it the way we're doing it. I said, well, you don't have many farms down there. I know there's one at Pierce College, but no, this is for the cities, golf courses,
Exactly.
parks, all those applications, you know, never stop to think about that, you know, but they have the same need. Mosquito districts, everybody has that need. But again, here we are sometimes just thinking very narrowly in terms of, you know, the application of that. Mentorships, Don Cameron, before he left, he said, what can I do? I said, $2 million. Yeah, he didn't say that. He said, what can I do to help? I said, well, you know, mentors. I said, we'd love to need some mentors. We've got some kids who we'd like to get them involved once they learn these applications on our farm. We'd like to get them hooked up with you guys. Great. Here's my card. Have Clint give me a call. Those are the kinds of things that really accelerate our program and help us feed the industry that really supports us in terms of the kinds of things that we do. You know, finally, it's all about people too. And I think that was one of the slides that was focused on. It's about ag, and I really, what touched me about that one slide about the giving garden was my first experience about gardening was with my grandfather in the city of Chicago. And half of our backyard was his garden. And all the bacon grease, all the egg shells, all the coffee grounds, all the potato clippings went out into the garden in the winter, right? And the snow covered it all. In spring, my job was to help Grandpa turn that soil. But in the springtime, we had so much radishes and so much lettuce and so many tomatoes. Our job was to distribute those in our neighborhood, because we couldn't eat them all. But it was a great concept, and it's kind of interesting to see how things kind of circle back in a neighborhood to kind of do that, to kind of grow your own food. It's an interesting way. But not everybody's going to have a neighborhood, and we're always going to need production ag in terms of the way to feed the world, and that's what this is all about. So
We should probably test your grandfather's soil at this point, though, Frank. The other thing I want to say is, I'm in the business where I just deal with problems day after day and trying to solve them. And today was an opportunity to hear about the good things that are happening. And I agree with Secretary Ross that in the near term it may be frustrating, but I think the long-term outlook is very encouraging if we pursue a lot of what we heard today. Because I think there's a lot that California can continue to offer if we continue to grab the golden ring and keep pressing forward.
Yeah, I guess finally the thing I would like to say is that in my 23 years or 30 years in the Valley, but specifically working up here in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley, you can't work with a more positive group of people than the people in ag. There isn't a problem that they can't solve or won't solve. They may complain and moan and do all kinds of stuff, but if there's a problem, they're going to solve it. Whether they have to use good old Okie engineering and baling wire, or they're going to get sophisticated and find out how to get this thing done. Because when you think about what they've still been able to do in terms of produce, in terms of tomatoes, or as a matter of fact, yesterday I had a conversation with a gentleman who was bragging about the fact that he had two of his older kids on the new cotton picking machines. The ones that roll the cotton up and seal it and drop it in the back. Sure, it's a $750,000 machine, okay, but he replaces 3 crews, in terms of labor, and it's just one person doing that field. So, you couldn't get a better example of how technology is impacting this area, and it was kind of refreshing to see cotton come back a little bit in the Valley. So, all in all, I think it was a good day. How about any comments that you might have from the...
Well, for those of you wondering, Game 7 tonight, Frank, Stu, and Clint have all guaranteed that there'll be 2 TVs streaming it. 2 TVs, 2 monitors streaming the game. So we're going to learn about the farm of the future and whether the Cubs or the Indians break their streak, right?
Any comments? Well, I guess not. Yeah.
Just one comment, and maybe you can. Well, one of the consistent threads throughout all 5 of these Essential Elements series has been the notion of advocacy and messaging, and how we do or we don't do in terms of telling our story in the Valley. And I remember the very first Essential Elements series where one of our outgoing mantras was, we live in the Valley by choice. And in many ways, we don't message and advocate and tell our story effectively. And I've noticed that it's come in pieces throughout each of the 5 series. And maybe that's a direction we can look at for the next series in terms of overall messaging, how we communicate. It's our acres, it's our water, it's our lifestyle. And what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's an idea that we should begin to tackle, because who tells the story is also just as important as the story to be told, and how we tell the story. And I think it's very important because, and I go back to the idea or actually the program we're doing with Avenel High School. These kids know about ag from a perspective of it's a long, hard occupation. They don't want to have any part of it. But when they get exposed to the kinds of things that that they can they can see a pathway for them in terms of a future. It's not something Dad or Grandpa or Grandma did. This is something I can do now and really have a career in agriculture. And I think it's how we tell that story, and it's California's food. It's, we take a lot of pride in the Valley's food, we being the generator of it, but it's California's food, and there is a purpose for regulation, and people need to know that that's what we wanted to do with this kind of a conference, is that we need one another in terms of that. At some point you have to know when you're running out of groundwater, and we've got to make those things happen at a better pace. So I think it'd be worth exploring.
I agree, because I think otherwise there's a tendency to have the Valley's issues, concerns, problems, challenges, opportunities defined by others. And I'm just thinking about over the last couple of years, when people talk about what's going on in the San Joaquin Valley, there are disadvantaged communities not receiving water. The drought is driving people out of jobs. There are long food lines on the west side. Everything that's coming out of here seems to be negative. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of good things to talk about, and one of the best ways to deal with that is to talk about how collaborative efforts are underway in the Valley to address the very issues I just talked about. And there are examples of where that's occurring, and then some of it may hasten because of the need to develop the sustainable groundwater management plans, and to deal with the nitrate question, and to deal with the irrigated lands program, things that Darren and his colleagues are working on. But the Valley's got to quit playing rope-a-dope and get out in front of those issues and define the future for itself before others define it for them.
Good. Tom?
It's actually in the same line of what you were saying, Jack, but also going back to your point, Frank, and I just wanted to express gratitude for this space to have this discussion, because we deliberately have set up our institute to take on some of these issues and bring science to bear on things that we know are going to be controversial. And we don't do that because we like making people upset, but that does happen sometimes. But I guess I have the philosophy that if your best friends won't tell you when there's a problem on its way, who's going to tell you? However, people don't always receive it that way. And I did feel today was a great model of a discussion where people view things from different perspectives, but everybody's mind was open, and people were willing to engage, and people were willing to go those steps to actually figure out where the common ground is. So I just wanted to say what a great event this is, and more power to you. We need more of these kinds of things in California, because things are changing, and we're not going to compete on cheap labor or cheap water or and we got to compete on our wealth of people, our wealth of resources that we do have, and our ability to actually innovate in this way. So it was a great pleasure to be here today.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Got a question back there.
And thank you for putting on the event as well. So I think the challenge is, we have the technology, we have all this stuff. It's really the leadership. I mean, there's 20,000 farmers in the San Joaquin Valley. They probably have 25,000 opinions. And it's bringing those folks together at a level of understanding. And we have a bifurcation going on. We have the farms over 1,000 acres, we're getting more of those, and the farms under 10 acres, we're getting more of those. So we've got two distinct groups out there that couldn't be more different. And how do we bring that voice as a single voice to address some of these issues? I think that's the real challenge, from my view anyway, is that we have this general understanding and the technology. It's all wonderful and stuff, but to get that out there and being used and being integrated into the regulation and the safety and all those kinds of things, I think that's the challenge, and the leadership. And who's going to do that? Whose role is that?
Well, that's a good point. I guess, leadership is, you don't ask whose role it is, you just decide to go ahead and do it. But your point about the dichotomy between the farmers, or at least the size of the farming operations, was brought up more than once today. I can recall, I think Don mentioned it about the whole, he was going to a board meeting today, and the small farmer thinks, okay, I'm in a coalition, that doesn't those regulations don't bother me, but that's not the case. And then maybe we do need to get more of the associations where the small farmer is represented in those associations here, the product association, you know, where they hear some of this dialogue as well, and maybe a voice for them. I guess, I don't know if that's really the case, if they're represented in those associations in larger numbers, because sometimes we do get the bigger voice here, but there's a lot of commonality between that smaller farmer and the large farmer. I mean, you know, John Harris's operation, he's just as a great a steward as anybody else who might be a small farmer who's totally organic, okay? But I think sometimes people think that they're, you know, we're at odds, and we need to kind of convene them in those issues. And then also coalesce around an issue. That was my issue to Robert was, okay, we know the problem is broadband, so where do we go to get it fixed? You know, I can come up with a solution for $26 million to solve it in this area, but where am I going to go? Where am I going to get the money? I don't have enough assessed value in my district to assess taxpayers to solve that problem. You know, I think the governor was onto something when he talked about, you know, the local control funding formula with schools, but also looking at the bond measures and things like that. I oppose him on that. I hope 51 passes, but he's right. I mean, there's districts that are, you know, LA, my counterpart in LA, Francisco, he's going out for a $3 billion bond. I said, Francisco, you haven't even spent the last two, and you're going out for a $3 billion bond. You know, I mean, give me a break. Why don't you give me a loan, Francisco?
Or have them adopt you.
Yeah.
But David, I think you reached the point that I know that Brian Leahy deals with it. I know that, you know, Darren has to deal with it. You know, what's the ag community say? Well, we got 400 plus commodities and about that many associations, and they don't always agree, and there's inter-association politics, and just like the environmental community looks over its left shoulder so they don't get taken out by their friend, well, agriculture looks over the other shoulder to be sure it doesn't, you know, shoot itself. So we do have those dynamics, and I know Paul Wenger, the Farm Bureau, has worked on kind of an Ag One thing to try to pull everybody together, but that has, you know, limited utility for inter-association political reasons. So it's just one thing we have to grapple with, and that's why I suggested some additional work with the commodity associations, because at least you get people to focus on things that are near and dear to their particular investment.
But that's a good idea. We need to not drop that. That's,
So just to add to that, I had this conversation with several folks over the course of the day about the unified voice, the getting ahead, et cetera. The corollary that has to also happen with that is to get away from this all or nothing mentality. So, and the ag community, I hate to say, and I'm from a farm too, the ag community has a particular propensity to, if they can't have all, they will happily settle for nothing, even though they could have got 50 or 60%. And they're one of the few groups that consistently does that, and it's just killing us. The environmental community is more than happy to take that 50% because they know the value of getting a foot in the door. Just about every interest group out there knows the value of getting a foot in the door. But the ag community has really got to start thinking about this all or nothing strategy. They've been doing it for decades. It is not working.
Well, I think, Glenda, it goes back to the point I made in response to David's question, is there's that concern about then I'm going to get attacked by my buddy association for not hanging in there long enough, and so everyone said, well, better to get nothing, and at least I'm protected that way.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Okay. Well, if there's no other, is the chariot ready there, Stu? Are we? Is the chariot ready out there?
It will be shortly.
Good.
Probably the next 10 minutes or
Good.
so.
Good.
I'm not sure. It should be right out front here.
Okay. Good. Good. Well, if there are no other comments, thank you, and hope to see you at the farm for our reception and a little dinner. Thank you.